welcome to Dusk, the channel where the people who work in the dark tell you what they've seen there. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere that most people have only ever seen in photographs. And even in photographs, it is difficult to fully understand what you are looking at. An offshore oil platform is a city. Not a large city, a small one by population, but a city in terms of what it contains: drilling equipment, processing facilities, living quarters, a helipad, cranes, lifeboats, water treatment, power generation, safety systems, communications equipment, cafeterias, gyms, medical bays. Everything that a functioning human community requires to sustain itself, compressed onto a structure the size of a few city blocks that is anchored to the seafloor by steel legs or kept in position by dynamic positioning thrusters, floating above water that may be anywhere from 200 to 3,000 meters deep. And then the platform ends. On every side, at the edge of the deck, the steel railing is all that separates you from the ocean. Not a shoreline, not a beach, not the gradual transition of a coastal landscape from land to water. The edge of the platform and then the ocean, beginning immediately in every direction as far as you can see, and further, the North Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, the waters off West Africa or Brazil or Southeast Asia. Deep, cold, indifferent water that goes down further than you want to think about, and that has no interest in whether you are there or not. The platforms run continuously. Drilling and production do not pause for night or weather except in the most extreme conditions, which means that at 0300, in the middle of a North Sea winter, with wind at force 8 and spray coming over the deck rails, there are people working, checking equipment, running systems, walking the catwalks, in full personal protective equipment, with a harness clipped to the rail, because the deck in those conditions is not a place where you take chances. Maintaining the machinery that keeps the platform operating and the people on it alive. Those people work in rotations, typically 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off. They fly out by helicopter. They live in the accommodation block. They work their shifts and sleep their rest periods and count down to the rotation end. They develop the specific relationship with isolation and with the ocean that only comes from spending weeks at a time, surrounded by nothing but water for 100 miles in every direction. And in the small hours of the night, in the wind and the sea spray, and the hum of the machinery that never stops, some of them experience things that their training and their technical expertise and their professional discipline do not give them a framework for. Tonight, we bring you 3 of those accounts. New here, welcome. This is what Dusk does every week. The stories from the people who work where most of you will never go. Subscribe if you want the next one to find you automatically. It keeps this channel alive. Now, let's go. Story 1. The figures from the lower deck. I want to start with something about the geography of an offshore platform that is not obvious until you have spent time on one. The platform is not a single flat surface. It is a layered structure, multiple deck levels connected by stairways and ladders, with different functions occupying different elevations. The main deck is where the primary drilling and production operations happen. Above it, the accommodation block and the helipad and the control room where the platform's brain lives. Below the main deck, the lower decks, the structural levels where the support framework connects the working surfaces to the legs, where the utility systems and the subsea equipment interfaces are located, where the grating underfoot is open mesh and the sea wind comes through from below in cold, unpredictable drafts that carry spray even when you are 60 feet above the waterline. The lower decks are the least populated part of the platform during normal operations. The work happens above. The people are above. The lower decks are accessed for specific maintenance tasks, for equipment inspection, for the systems that require proximity to the structure's foundations. They are functional spaces, not social ones. At night, in heavy weather, they are places that experienced offshore workers move through quickly and efficiently and do not linger in, not because they are officially restricted, because they are the furthest point on the platform from shelter, from warmth, from other people, and from the specific reassurance of populated spaces. They are the edge of the structure, in the most literal sense, the closest point to the ocean, the point where the platform feels smallest because the water is most present. I had been working offshore for 11 years when this happened. 11 years covers a significant range of experience and environment, multiple platforms, multiple roles, multiple sea areas. I had worked the North Sea, the Mediterranean, the Gulf of Mexico. I had worked summer rotations and winter rotations, and the specific brutal category of the North Sea in February, which is its own education. I was a derrick hand with supervisory experience, a man who had spent 11 years learning the specific grammar of offshore environments and who was fluent in it in the way that only sustained experience produces. The most important thing those 11 years gave me was a calibrated relationship with the perceptual tricks that offshore environments play. The wind that sounds like a human voice, and it does. In certain conditions and certain structural configurations, it sounds uncannily like someone calling out from a direction you cannot identify. The spray that looks like movement in your peripheral vision, because the light catches it at certain angles against certain backgrounds. The way darkness and the constant motion of a platform in sea state and the sleep disruption of rotation schedules can affect perception in ways that experienced workers learn to account for and check against reality before acting on. 11 years of that calibration, 11 years of distinguishing between what my senses reported and what was actually there. I was good at it. I had a reliable track record. In 11 years, I had never filed a report that I was later unable to support with evidence. I had colleagues who had reported things offshore that turned out to be sleep deprivation or the specific disorientation that poor rotation management produces in people who don't take it seriously. I was not that colleague. My sleep discipline was solid. My rotation management was by the book. My professional reputation was built on the kind of reliable, evidence-based observation that 11 years in a hazard environment produces in people who survive it with their record intact. I say all of this not to establish that I was infallible. Nobody is infallible. I say it because what I am about to tell you requires that you understand what I was and wasn't when it happened. I was not frightened. I was not disoriented. I was not in a state that any of the frameworks I had for understanding perception errors would have flagged as compromised. I was doing a routine inspection on week 6 of a rotation in conditions that were heavy but manageable, and I was the right person to be doing it. This was not a false signal. The shift was night shift on a production platform in the North Sea, 6th week of a 2-month rotation, deep winter. The specific psychological state that 6 weeks offshore produces is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. You are functional. Your professional competence is intact. Your performance is what it needs to be. But the world has narrowed to the dimensions of the platform, and the platform's dimensions, which seemed spacious in the first week, have by week 6 become a known and exhausted terrain where there is nothing left to discover and nothing left to surprise you, except that it is precisely that state, the exhaustion of novelty, the conviction that you know every corner of the structure, that makes the anomalous thing most visible when it appears. Because you have nothing to compare it to, except the very specific baseline you have built over 6 weeks, and when something departs from that baseline, it departs clearly. It was S0220. I was doing my lower deck inspection. The North Sea that night was force 6, significant wave height around 4 meters, heavy but within the operational parameters for lower deck access. Full cold weather gear, harness attached to the rail as the working at height protocol required for those conditions. Moving through the inspection with the muscle memory of someone who has done it so many times that the route is automatic, and the attention can be directed entirely at the equipment rather than at the navigation. At the 3rd monitoring station on the northeast corner of the lower deck, I stopped. There was someone at the railing ahead of me. The northeast corner was a grating platform approximately 8 meters wide and 12 meters long, bounded on 3 sides by the perimeter railing and on the 4th by the vertical face of the topside structure. Working lights mounted on that face gave flat industrial illumination to the deck surface. The visibility was clear. The corner was sheltered enough from the direct wind to keep the spray manageable. The figure was at the rail, standing at the very edge, both hands on the top bar, facing out toward the ocean. The color was right. Orange, the standard offshore survival suit. The size was right. Everything about the immediate visual impression was, crew member, correct PPE, looking at the sea. I called out. Even in force 6 at the distance I was at, I should have been audible. No response. I moved toward them. 30 feet, 20, 15, close enough to see clearly in the working light. The figure was not attached to the railing. In those conditions, that was the immediate and serious problem. A crew member at the lower deck rail in force 6 without their harness attached to the structure was 1 wave impact away from going into the water. I accelerated toward them. 10 feet. 8. The working light was full on both of us. I saw what the distance had not allowed me to see before. The figure was standing with an absolute stillness that was not possible in those conditions. Force 6. 4 meters swells. The platform was moving. not dramatically. Platforms of that size move within margins that the structure is designed for, but move. The deck under my boots was moving. The wind at that corner was significant and direct. A person standing at that rail in that weather would have been bracing, would have been leaning, would have been showing the micro adjustments of a body managing balance in a dynamic environment. The figure was perfectly still. The way something is still when it does not have to manage what the wind is doing, because the wind is not doing anything to it. I reached out and put my hand on the shoulder of the orange suit. My hand made contact with nothing, not with something that then disappeared, with nothing from the start. The space where the shoulder was visible to my eyes was empty to my hand. I was touching the rail behind where the figure appeared to be standing, and the figure appeared to be between me and the rail, and there was nothing between me and the rail. I stood at the northeast corner of the lower deck of a North Sea production platform at 0221 in force 6 conditions, with my hand on a railing and nothing in front of me where something had been visible for the 30 seconds it had taken me to cross the deck toward it. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say nothing in front of me, because precision matters here in a way it has not mattered in other things I've described. I do not mean that the figure disappeared as I reached for it. I do not mean that it moved out of the way. I mean that my hand, reaching toward a shoulder that my eyes showed me was there, made contact with the rail immediately behind where the shoulder should have been, with nothing in between, the space between my hand and the rail, the space that my eyes reported as containing a shoulder, the space that the orange survival suit should have occupied. That space was physically empty. I made contact with the rail. There was nothing between my palm and the metal. I stood there. I pulled my hand back and I looked at it. I looked at the rail. I looked at the ocean beyond the rail, which was exactly as it had been, dark, moving, indifferent. I completed my inspection. This took an act of professional discipline that I am still, years later, somewhat proud of, the specific ability to continue doing what the job requires even when something has happened that every instinct is trying to use as an excuse to stop. I completed every monitoring station. I logged every reading. I returned to the main deck through the correct access point, and not by any faster route. I finished my shift. I did not sleep during my rest period. I lay on my bunk and looked at the ceiling of the accommodation block and thought about what my hand had felt when it reached for a shoulder that was not there. I did not file an incident report. I have thought about that decision many times. The honest reason is that I did not have a category for it. The incident reporting system is designed for safety events, near misses, equipment failures, environmental incidents. There is no category for. I reached for a crew member who was standing at the lower deck rail without a harness in force 6, and my hand went through nothing. Filing that report would have created a record that implied something about my mental state, that the reporting system was not designed to assess accurately, and that would have been assessed inaccurately. I chose not to create that record. I have done 7 more rotations on that platform. The northeast corner of the lower deck is where I always finished the inspection. I always paused before approaching the railing. The working light is full and the deck is empty, and I always pause anyway. I look at the rail and the space in front of it, and the ocean beyond it. The platform is still running. The lower deck inspection still happens every night. Someone walks to the northeast corner and checks the monitoring station and looks at the rail and the ocean beyond it. I am not always the one doing it now, but I always think about whoever is. Story 2. The broadcast. There is something that offshore communications personnel call a ghost signal. The term is informal, not in any technical manual, not in any regulatory framework, not in any official communication protocol. It is the term that people who work offshore communications use, amongst themselves and in the private conversations of experienced workers, for the phenomenon of receiving a transmission on a monitored frequency from a source that cannot be identified and that the platform's logs show no record of. Ghost signals happen. Not often. Often enough that experienced offshore communications personnel have encountered the phenomenon and understand its general parameters. Not so often that it is routine. The technical explanations are well established and real. Atmospheric ducting, which is the bending of radio waves by temperature inversions in the atmosphere, and which can carry signals thousands of miles beyond their normal range. Ionospheric skip, which involves the reflection of radio waves off the upper atmosphere, and which produces similar long-range propagation effects. Spurious signals generated by equipment anomalies in the receiving hardware that the system interprets as receptions, but that are internal artifacts with no external source. These explanations account for most ghost signals, and they are technically sound and professionally defensible. What the technical explanations do not address is the experience of receiving one. Because a ghost signal sounds like a person, it has the specific quality of voice, not the quality of static, not the quality of electronic noise, not the quality of weather-related interference that anyone who works in maritime communications learns to recognize and categorize, but the quality of a human being on the other end of a line who is speaking to you or to someone, and what that human being is saying arrives in your ears with a clarity that makes it difficult to apply the technical explanations without a gap between the explanation and the experience. The technical explanation says, "This is a fragment of a distant transmission carried by atmospheric accident to your receiver." The experience says, "Someone is on the other end of this line." I was the communications officer on a production platform in deep water off the coast of West Africa. 6 years in offshore communications by that point, the last 2 as the senior communications person on this platform. I knew my systems the way you know tools you have used every day for 2 years. Not just their operation, but their personality, the specific way they behaved under different conditions, the sounds and readings they produced when everything was correct, and the specific deviations that indicated something was not. The night this happened was week 4 of 6 in my current rotation. It was 0140. I was alone in the communications center, performing the nightly equipment check, a 2-hour process that I knew so well that my mind was partly on the work and partly on the things that minds go to during familiar tasks at 0140 in the morning. The rotation end, the people I was going to see when I got back, the specific luxury of sleeping in a bed that was not moving. The GMDSS receiver activated. The Global Maritime Distress and Safety System is the international framework for maritime emergency communications. Every offshore platform maintains a continuous watch on the GMDSS frequencies, DSC channel 70, and the voice distress frequency, VHF channel 16. An activation means the system has received something. Most of the time it is routine, test transmissions, automated weather broadcasts, the background traffic of the busy sea area. Occasionally, it is a genuine distress. I checked the display. Voice channel, not DSC, not automated broadcast. A voice transmission. I put on the headset. The transmission was clear, not degraded, not distorted, not the atmospheric ghost of something that had traveled too far. Clear in the way of something that had not traveled far at all. A male voice, calm and precise, delivering a mayday call in the correct format. Position, nature of distress, number of persons on board, request for immediate assistance, everything in the right sequence. The format of someone who had been trained in exactly this procedure and was executing it correctly, under conditions that, by the nature of the mayday call, were not optimal. The position was approximately 40 nautical miles northwest of our platform. I responded immediately. This is not a decision. It is a reflex built by training and reinforced by the understanding of what is at stake when someone is sending a mayday in deep water off the coast of West Africa. I gave our platform identification, our position, confirmed receipt of the distress call, asked the vessel to confirm their position and status. Silence. I tried 3 times. GMDSS protocol. 3 attempts at intervals. No response to any of them. I woke the OIM and the medic. I notified the Regional Maritime Rescue Coordination Center via satellite, gave them the reported position and the nature of the distress. The MRCC acknowledged and initiated their response. 20 minutes later, no vessels in the reported position. The area clear on radar. No other stations had received a mayday on Channel 16 in the preceding hour. The transmission was not in the MRCC's received communications record. I reviewed my own logs. The GMDSS receiver had activated. The event was logged. Duration 14 seconds. No content recording because the platform system did not auto-record voice transmissions on Channel 16. Only DSC activations captured content automatically. I had been wearing the headset. I was the only record of what the transmission said. The investigation that followed was thorough and serious. The platform operator took it seriously. The regulatory authority took it seriously. The conclusion was, no vessel identified, no other receiving station confirmed, no technical explanation beyond the standard ghost signal hypotheses. Ghost signal. Atmospheric ducting carrying a fragment of a transmission from a distant source, which happened to sound like a correctly formatted mayday call from a position in range of our platform, received by one person on one platform, logged as an event without retrievable content. I've returned to that explanation many times. It is technically possible. All of its components are real phenomena. It almost works. What it does not work with is the specific precision of what I heard. A ghost signal carries a fragment of whatever was being transmitted at the source. A fragment of a conversation on a fishing vessel, a portion of a weather broadcast, a fragment of a routine operational communication, random content because the source is random and the propagation is accidental. What I received was a correctly formatted Mayday call. Every element present, every element in the correct order. The specific and precise format of a person in distress who knows exactly what they are supposed to say and is saying it. That is not a fragment. That is a complete and coherent communication. I have thought about the person on the other end of that transmission many times, not abstractly, specifically. A male voice, calm under conditions that would not permit calm unless the person possessed a specific kind of trained steadiness, executing the Mayday procedure correctly, which means they had been trained to do it, and the training was holding even in whatever was happening to them. Transmitting from a position 40 nautical miles northwest of my platform in deep water off the coast of West Africa, and in silence when I responded. 3 attempts, each following the protocol exactly, each returned with nothing. I have run the scenarios. The vessel was already in a state that prevented response by the time I replied, sinking fast enough that the transmission was sent in a window that closed before I could respond. The person who sent it was no longer in a position to receive my response. The vessel's equipment was damaged and could transmit, but not receive. These are all technically possible scenarios that account for the silence after the initial call. They do not account for the fact that no one else received the transmission, that the position was empty, that the MRCC, with resources and monitoring capacity that vastly exceed a single platform's communication center, had nothing. I monitor the GMDSS frequencies on every rotation. I respond to every activation without exception. There is no scenario in which I do not respond, because the alternative, receiving a transmission and not responding, even one with no verified source, is not something I am capable of doing in good conscience. That will not change. Whatever the source of the transmission I received at 0140, the response protocol exists for the case where the source is real. I responded as if it was real. I will always respond as if it is real. It is the only thing I know how to do. Story 3. What the Rove found. The last story requires context about the technology, because the technology is the thing that makes this story different from the ones that came before it. A remotely operated vehicle is an unmanned submersible. On offshore platforms, ROVs perform the inspection and intervention work that exists below the depth where human diving is safe or practical. They go down to the wellheads, the pipelines, the risers, the mooring systems, the subsea infrastructure that holds the platform's production together, and they relay real-time video and sensor data to operators on the surface who control every movement. The ROV operator sits at a workstation in a warm room on the platform and watches the feed from cameras moving through water that is hundreds or thousands of meters below them, in darkness and pressure that no unprotected human body can survive. The ROV camera feeds are recorded continuously during deployment. Regulatory requirement and operational necessity. The recordings are archived, they are reviewable, they provide a permanent record of what the ROV saw at every depth, on every deployment. This is important for understanding what makes the third story different from the first two. The first two are experiential. One person's account of something they perceived. The third story has footage. I was an ROV supervisor on a deep water platform in the Gulf of Mexico. 5 years as supervisor, 3 before that as a pilot. 8 years total of watching what ROV cameras show you at depth, which is an education in what the deep ocean looks like up close. Not the deep ocean of nature documentaries, which are composed for visual effect and show the dramatic and the beautiful. The deep ocean of ROV inspection work, which is mostly sediment and structure and the specific industrial reality of infrastructure at extreme depth. You learn what normal looks like at 1400 meters. You learn what the seafloor looks like, what the structure looks like, what the marine life that exists at that depth looks like when it wanders into the light cone. My pilot that night had been operating ROVs for 8 years. Different platforms, different sea areas, 8 years of the same education I had. We had worked together for 2 years. I trusted his read on what the camera was showing him. He did not flag things without reason. We were 90 minutes into a routine inspection of the riser connections at the base of the platform, 1,400 meters below the surface, in water that was cold and dark and, by the standards of what ROV work usually shows you, unremarkable. He slowed the vehicle, changed the search pattern. I moved to the primary screen to see what he was seeing. He had the ROV pointed into open water, away from the riser, away from the platform infrastructure, into the black that the lights could not reach. I asked what he was looking at. He said he wasn't sure. He said something had moved at the edge of the light. At 1,400 meters, things move at the edge of ROB lights. He knew that. 8 years of watching it. I asked him what kind of movement. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was large. I watched the primary screen with him as he moved the ROV forward, slowly, into open water. The light cone showed sediment below and water column above and dark beyond. Nothing at the edge. Whatever he had seen had moved out of the frame. He described what he had seen before the turn, a shape, at the upper boundary of the light cone, moving parallel to the seafloor. Lateral movement across the field of view and then beyond it. He said the movement had a quality he could not categorize. Not fish movement. He was specific about this. 8 years of watching fish at various depths had given him a reference library for fish movement, and this was not in that library. Not debris and current. Not any identified characteristic. He used the phrase, "I knew how it moved, and it was not like those things." We spent 12 minutes in open water. Nothing appeared again at the edge of the light. We returned the ROV to the inspection route, completed the work, surface to vehicle. I reviewed the deployment footage that night. The inspection, the turn, the 12 minutes in open water, the return, and then I found it. At the moment he had slowed the vehicle, the moment before he turned it toward open water, there were 3 consecutive frames in which something was visible at the upper edge of the light cone. At operational playback speed, invisible. At frame by frame, present in 3 consecutive frames. I watched those 3 frames many times that night. The shape was large. Larger than the spread of the light cone suggested would be normal for marine life at that depth. Its movement, visible only as a change in position between the 3 frames, was consistent with what the pilot had described. Lateral, parallel to the seafloor, and then beyond the frame. The ROB camera at 1,400 meters depth does not give you high resolution at the edge of the light cone. What those 3 frames showed was a shape and a direction of movement at a size. I showed the footage to the pilot. He watched the 3 frames twice without speaking. Then he said, "That's what I saw." I have shown those frames to 3 marine biologists in the years since. The responses have been consistent in their honesty and inconsistent in their conclusions. One suggested undescribed species, large deep-water organisms that science has not formally cataloged, of which there are more than most people realize given how poorly surveyed the deep ocean remains even now. The proportion of the seafloor that has been directly observed is vanishingly small. New species are described from the deep ocean every year, including large ones, including things that challenge the existing taxonomies. An undescribed large organism at 1,400 meters in the Gulf of Mexico is not, by the standards of what marine biology considers plausible, an extraordinary claim. One of the biologists said the movement characteristics, as much as 3 frames could reveal them, were inconsistent with any large deepwater species currently in the scientific literature. The third one looked at the footage for a long time, longer than either of the others, in a specific quality of attention that I recognized as the attention of someone who is genuinely uncertain, and then said, "We have mapped less of the seafloor than we have mapped the surface of Mars. If something large was at the edge of your light, at 1,400 meters in the Gulf of Mexico, I believe you. And I do not know what it was." That third response has stayed with me more than the others, because it is the honest one. The honest acknowledgement that the deep ocean, at the depths where offshore platforms operate, is one of the least understood environments on this planet, and that the category of things that could be in that water and that we do not yet have names for is not a small category. It is a large one. It may be a very large one. The footage is archived. It is part of the official record of that deployment. The 3 frames are there, as they were recorded, as they will remain as long as the archiving system holds them. Anyone with access to the deployment records of that platform on that date can find those 3 frames and look at them and form their own conclusion. What I think about when I think about those 3 frames is not just the shape, it is the depth. 1,400 meters. The pressure at that depth is approximately 140 atmospheres, 140 times the pressure at the surface. The temperature is a few degrees above freezing. The darkness is absolute. Our RV operates in that environment as a visitor, which it is a machine designed by people who live at sea level, sent down to a world that operates by physics that sea level existence does not prepare you for intuitively. Whatever was at the edge of the light that night lives in that world, not visits it, lives in it, has adapted to 140 atmospheres of pressure and near-freezing temperatures and absolute darkness as its baseline state of existence. It does not experience those conditions as extreme, it experiences them as normal. What it might experience as extreme is the ROV, the lights, the heat of the thrusters, the electromagnetic noise of the electronics, the intrusion of something that does not belong at 1,400 meters in the Gulf of Mexico, behaving as if it does. We put our lights into its world. And for 3 consecutive frames, it came to the edge of what our lights could reach and was visible to our cameras. Whether it was curious or investigating or simply moving through its environment and crossing our light cone by chance, I cannot tell you. I do not have the information to answer that question. What I can tell you is that I have not stopped thinking about those 3 frames, and I have not stopped thinking about what exists in the dark beyond the 20 meters that our lights can reach, at 1,400 meters depth in the Gulf of Mexico right now, while you are listening to this. The platform above, the infrastructure below, and in the water column between them, whatever moves through there in the dark that the lights never reach. 3 platforms, 3 people, 3 nights at the edge of what human engineering has placed in the middle of the ocean. What I keep returning to, across all 3 of these accounts, is something about the specific nature of the offshore environment that I think matters for understanding why these things happened here and not somewhere else. Not why they happened to these particular people. These were experienced, competent, professionally disciplined individuals who were doing their jobs correctly and who brought to their experiences the calibration that years of working in demanding environments produces. But why the offshore platform, as an environment, is the place where the seams show. The platform is a human construction placed in a natural environment that vastly predates it and will vastly outlast it. It is a few hundred meters of steel and engineering in the middle of an ocean that covers 70% of the Earth's surface, and that has existed in approximately its current form for hundreds of millions of years. The platform is not native to this environment. It is a visitor, a temporary occupation, a thing that was not there and will eventually not be there again, in a place that does not require it and does not particularly accommodate it. The engineering is extraordinary. The achievement of keeping a structure stable in sea states that would destroy most human constructions, of maintaining a working environment in conditions that are genuinely hostile to human life, is a significant engineering accomplishment. And still, from the ocean's perspective, it is temporary. It is recent. It is a thin surface phenomenon on a body of water that has been indifferent to what happens on its surface for geological time. The people who work on the platform are in the same position. They are visitors, rotating in and out, in an environment that operates on different rules than the ones they live by on land. The safety protocols exist because the environment is indifferent to human presence in ways that land environments are not. The weather does not account for people at the railing. The water does not account for people who fall into it. The depth does not account for ROV cameras that illuminate its margins with white it has never needed, and that it will not miss when the equipment is recovered and the deployment is over, and the dark returns. And sometimes, in that environment, in the small hours of the night, when the rotation is deep and the weather is serious, and the machinery hums its constant note, and the ocean is present in every direction, something shows at the edge of what the environment permits us to see. A figure at the northeast corner of the lower deck, standing at the railing in 4-6, perfectly still, with nothing there when a hand reached for it. A voice on a frequency that no other station received, delivering a correctly formatted distress call from a position that was empty. 3 frames of footage at the very limit of what our lights could reach, showing a shape that 8 years of experience in the deep ocean could not categorize. Not hostile, not theatrical, not the horror of something that announces itself and demands attention. Something that was there and then was not. Something that existed at the margin of what we could perceive and then withdrew back below the margin. The ocean is large. It is old. What lives in it and moves through it and occupies the margins of our presence in it has been doing so far longer than we have been placing platforms above it. We are the visitors. We come in rotations of 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and then we leave and the platform stays and the ocean stays, and whatever moves through the water column below the platform and whatever stands at the railing on the lower deck in the 4-6 dark stays with it, continues being whatever it is, independent of whether we are there to observe it. We build our infrastructure. We lower our cameras. We monitor our frequencies. And occasionally, at 0222 or at 0140, or during a routine subsea inspection 90 minutes in, the margin shifts briefly and something is visible that was not visible before and then is not visible again. Most of the time, the margin holds. But the margin is always there. This is Iron Dusk. Every week, accounts from the people who work in the places the rest of you never go. The platforms, the tunnels, the towers, the deep water, the polar dark. If you want to keep hearing them, subscribe. 3 seconds. The next story finds you automatically. And if you have worked an offshore platform, if you have spent a rotation out there in the middle of the ocean and something happened in the night watch that you have never been able to account for, you know where to find me. Sleep well. Or don't.